A fallen actor returns to the ruins of a theater destroyed by fire, gathering his former troupe to rebuild both the stage and their shattered lives. Amid guilt, loss, and fragile hope, they create one final play, turning ashes of the past into redemption and rebirth.
The air hung heavy with the scent of smoke and burnt timber, a stale reminder of a fire long past yet never fully extinguished in memory. I stood alone amid the skeleton of what had once been my world, a theater alive with light and laughter, now a tomb of ash and silence. The floor beneath me crunched with every tentative step, shards of charred wood and twisted metal pressing into the soles of my worn boots. Around me, broken seats lay scattered, their upholstery blackened and torn, as if the ghosts of audiences past had fled in terror, leaving only echoes behind. The sky above was a dull gray, the sun struggling through the thick canopy of clouds, casting fractured beams of light through the gaping wounds of the roof. I tilted my head, watching as dust motes danced lazily in the shafts, each particle a tiny universe suspended in limbo. It was a place both dead and strangely alive, a prison for my regrets, and a sanctuary for the embers of a dream I refused to let die. My hands were stained with soot, the fine powder tracing unnoticed lines across my palms as I absently brushed them over the jagged edge of the stage. The wood was rough and brittle, cracked from the heat and time, but beneath its scars lay the ghosts of countless performances. I could almost hear the distant hum of applause, the rustle of velvet curtains, the murmur of hushed anticipation. Those sounds lived in the air, faint and flickering, like fireflies caught in a jar. I remembered the night it all burned, the fire that swallowed the theater whole, consuming not just timber and fabric, but my career, my reputation, and the fragile threads of my own identity. The scandal that followed was as merciless as the flames, and I was left to wander the ashes alone, a fallen star swallowed by the darkness of my own mistakes. The world had turned its back. Even I had begun to believe that the curtain had fallen forever. Yet, here I was. The ruins whispered to me, a voice both cruel and tender, reminding me of what was lost and what might still be reclaimed. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, faces from the past, lines learned and forgotten, the thrill of a spotlight's warm embrace. Each recollection was a spark, fragile yet persistent, a small flame defying the chill of despair. Opening my eyes, I surveyed the desolation once more. This broken stage, these shattered walls, were my prison and my sanctuary. The fire that razed this place had not just destroyed wood and plaster. It had burned away illusions and pretenses, leaving only raw truth. If I was to find redemption, it would not be in grand gestures or hollow fame, but here, in the ashes, in the honest act of creation amid ruin. A slow breath escaped me, steadying the tremor that had taken residence in my chest. I spoke aloud, my voice rough but clear, the sound reverberating against the charred beams. "One last play," I said. "One final chance to reclaim what's been lost." The silence that followed was deep, but it was not empty. It was filled with possibility, fragile as a spider's web shimmering with dew. The decision settled over me like a cloak, heavy with responsibility but light with hope. I began to walk, my footsteps stirring the ashes, each step a promise to myself. This theater, this ruin, was not merely the end of a story, but the beginning of another. I would find those who remained, the scattered embers of a troupe broken by time and hardship. Together we might breathe life into these ruins, transforming memory and pain into something new, something real. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke and something else, possibility. And as I looked once more at the broken stage, I felt the first stirrings of a fragile hope. The fire that had destroyed us all was still burning within me, a consuming force of destruction and transformation. This was my stage again. This was my story to tell. I paused at the threshold, hesitating for a moment as shadows lengthened and the light waned. The night would soon come, and with it, the ghosts of the past. But I was ready to face them. For better or worse, this was my path forward, and I would walk it through the ashes. The theater waited, silent and expectant. And so did I. The first step had been taken. I stood at the edge of the street, the dying light of afternoon folding into dusk, casting long shadows over uneven pavement. Before me, the faded brick of Mara's building caught the last amber rays, its windows darkened but alive with the promise of human presence. I hesitated, dust swirling at my feet, the weight of years pressing down. The silence between my thoughts as heavy as the ash that still coated my clothes. Then, almost without will, I raised my hand and knocked. The door opened before I could second guess, a sliver of warm light spilling onto the stoop. Mara stood there, a figure of sturdy resolve, short, practical clothes dusted with soot, her hands rough and stained from the endless work of keeping memories alive amid ruins. Her eyes, sharp and searching, locked onto mine with a mixture of surprise and something softer, something like cautious welcome. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, her voice steady but not unkind. "Neither was I admitted, stepping inside the cramped hallway that smelled of old wood and stubborn hope. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dust and faint smoke, remnants of the fire that had stolen our past, but not yet our will. Mara had transformed this modest space into a makeshift command center, a nexus of plans and scraps of scripts pinned to walls, scarred by time. She moved with purpose, her every gesture blending pragmatism with a fierce, nurturing instinct. "We can't pretend it's the same," she said, eyes flickering toward the cracked plaster and peeling paint. "But maybe it doesn't have to be. Maybe it's enough that we're still here." Her words struck a chord, fragile but resonant. I nodded, feeling the stirrings of a fragile hope bud amidst the ruins. The next step was Oliver. Finding him had been a tangled path through whispers and shadows, but at last I stood before a grimy door in a neighborhood that had long lost its shine. The bar inside was dim, the air thick with smoke and the heavy scent of spilled drinks. Oliver sat alone, a glass of amber liquid cradled in his hand, his eyes burning with a mix of pain and defiance. When our eyes met, the years of silence screamed between us. "Didn't think you'd come," he said, voice rough, laced with skepticism. "Someone has to see this through," I replied, voice low but firm. Our conversation was a dance of old wounds and reluctant admissions, sharp words masking the recognition of shared loss. Oliver's cynicism was a blade, but beneath it lay a buried respect for the man I once was and perhaps still could be. The night outside was cold as I left his company, the city sounds muffled beneath a blanket of chill. My breath formed fleeting clouds, each exhale a whisper against the darkness. Despite the weight of the past, despite the fractures and the scars, I felt a tentative spark of fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we could piece together something from the ashes. Gathering Mara and Oliver was only the beginning. Each step forward was a step into uncertainty, into the tangled web of memories and regrets that bound us. Yet beneath the weight of our individual scars, there stirred a shared desire to reclaim dignity, to find meaning amid ruin. The troop had been scattered like ashes on the wind, but now, slowly, they were beginning to come home. As I walked back toward the theater ruins, the night deepened, and with it, the quiet pulse of possibility. There was much to mend, much to face, and the road ahead was steep and shadowed. But for the first time in a long while, I dared to believe that redemption might be within reach. The fire that had consumed us had not yet extinguished the flame inside. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I prepared to gather the lost and lead them back into the light of the stage one last time. The first light of dawn spilled weakly through the shattered windows of the old theater, casting long, ghostly shadows across the cracked wooden floor. I stood alone at center stage, my eyes tracing the charred remains of what had once been a grand proscenium arch, now a jagged silhouette against the pale morning. The scent of ash and dust hung heavy in the air, a silent testament to the fire that had reduced this place to ruin. Yet, amid the desolation, I felt a stubborn pulse, a fragile heartbeat beneath the rubble. Today, the troupe would gather here for the first time in years, and the play that might save us all would begin to take shape. The creak of the back door startled me from my reverie. Mara stepped inside, her short frame outlined against the early light. Her hands were smudged with soot, the practical clothes she wore dusted with ash. I noticed the familiar set of her jaw, the same resolve that had kept this small company alive through the darkest days. Behind her came Oliver, his presence impossible to overlook even in this ruin. He carried the weight of his own demons in the sharpness of his gaze, the disheveled hair falling haphazardly over his forehead. And close behind, tentative and bright-eyed, Jenna followed a newcomer whose innocence seemed almost out of place here. "It's strange," Mara said quietly, stepping over broken boards and scattered debris, "to be back here like this. But maybe that's exactly why we have to try." Oliver didn't reply, his eyes scanning the cracked walls and the remnants of the stage. I caught the flicker of something bitterness, regret, maybe even a spark of hope before he masked it with a sardonic smile. We gathered what was left of the old scripts and set about arranging ourselves in the space. The silence pressed down like a weight, each of us acutely aware of the ghosts watching from the shadows. When we began reading, our voices were cautious, almost afraid to fill the hollow theater with sound. The dust stirred with every breath, and I imagined the echoes of the past performances still lingering in the air. The first scene we tackled was a simple exchange, but even that was laden with unspoken tension. Oliver's sharp tone clashed with the softer cadence I tried to strike, and soon enough, disagreement simmered to the surface. "You're missing the point," Oliver snapped, his voice cutting through the stillness. "This isn't about nostalgia. It's about truth raw and unforgiving." I met his gaze, feeling the old resentment flare, and what truth is that we re-ghosts clinging to the past? Before the exchange could escalate, Mara stepped between us, her voice firm but calm. "Enough, this isn't the time to tear each other apart. We have a play to put on, imperfect, yes, but ours." Her words seemed to settle the room, though the tension lingered like smoke. Jenna, who had been quietly absorbing everything, took a hesitant step forward. "May I try?" she asked, clutching the worn script to her chest. All eyes turned to her, and for a moment, the oppressive weight of failure lifted. She cleared her throat and began to speak, her voice trembling but growing steadier with each line. The rawness of her delivery breathed life into the words, a small flame flickering amid the ashes. As she finished, a fragile smile touched Mara's lips. Oliver nodded once, a silent acknowledgement. We ended the rehearsal not with triumph but with a shared, tentative hope, a fragile thread that might one day stitch together the torn fabric of our past and present. The theater, though broken, had not yet surrendered its soul. That night, as I lay awake beneath a sky thick with stars, I heard the faintest whisper of applause carried on the wind. It was a promise, a challenge, and perhaps the beginning of redemption. The stage lay bare beneath the cracked ceiling, its timbers blackened and brittle, the scent of charred wood heavy in the still air. I stood alone, the echoes of a forgotten applause replaced by the solemn hush of ruin. Around me, the ashes whispered secrets I dared not voice. The fire that night, the blaze that consumed everything, our dreams, our sanctuary, and so much more. I traced a finger along the splintered edge of the stage, my touch leaving a faint smear of ash, a mark as fleeting as the memories swirling in my mind. It was impossible to separate past from present here. The theater, once alive with laughter and light, was now a mausoleum of memories. Flickers of flame danced before my eyes, and suddenly I was back in that terrible moment. The heat was suffocating, the roar of flames drowning out cries and shouts. Faces blurred in the smoke, frantic hands grasping for escape. I remembered the panic, the disbelief, and the overwhelming sense of failure that seized me when I realized the fire was no accident. I had been careless, reckless. The weight of that truth crushed me anew with every breath. The guilt was a constant companion, a shadow that clung to my bones. Yet here I was, daring to rebuild from these ashes, to summon life from death. A sudden voice broke my reverie. We can't keep losing ourselves in what happened, Mara said firmly, stepping through the haze. Her soot-smudged hands trembled slightly as she gestured toward a charred prop lying forgotten near the wings. This place is fragile like us, but it's still ours. If we want to move forward, we have to hold on to that. Her words, steady and unwavering, cut through the oppressive silence. Mara had been my anchor since the beginning, her pragmatism a lifeline amid the chaos. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Around us, the troop gathered, faces etched with weariness and old wounds, each carrying their own burdens. Oliver's voice suddenly pierced the quiet, sharp and raw. You think you can just put on a show here and pretend none of this ever happened? His eyes, dark and intense, locked onto mine. We all lost something that night. But you're the one who let it burn. The accusation hung in the air, bitter and cutting. I felt the sting of his words, but also the truth behind them. Our fractured friendship, once forged in shared dreams, now splintered by pain and regret. Yet beneath the bitterness, there was a fragile thread of respect, a grudging acknowledgement that we were bound together by more than just the past. I took a breath, my voice low and steady despite the tremor inside. I won't deny my part in what happened. I carry that weight every day. But this play, it's not just about atonement. It's about remembering who we were and who we might still become. The room seemed to hold its breath. The fire had taken much from us, but it had also forged something new, something raw and real. The memories, painful as they were, became the very fuel for our fragile hope. As the rehearsal resumed, the weight of memory pressed heavily on us all. Each line spoken was a step through the ashes, each gesture a defiant spark against the darkness. The theater might be in ruins, but within those crumbling walls something began to stir, a faint, flickering flame of possibility. I glanced at Mara, her eyes steady as ever, and then at Oliver, whose defiance masked a deep, atching longing. We were scarred, broken, but not beyond repair. And as the shadows lengthened and the day faded, I found myself daring to believe that from these embers, something worth living for might yet rise. But the path was far from certain. The fire within us all burned fiercely, sometimes consuming, sometimes illuminating, and only time would tell if that flame would destroy us or guide us home. The night crept in, cold and vast, and I stood at the edge of the stage, the ruins stretching out like a graveyard of dreams. Yet beneath the ash and ruin, a quiet heartbeat pulsed, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, memory and fire could kindle the faintest hope for redemption. And so, with trembling hands and a resolute heart, I stepped forward, ready to face the ghosts that waited in the shadows, and to begin the long, uncertain journey back to the light. The embers glowed softly in the darkness, a promise and a warning that from destruction, transformation might yet arise. But the question lingered, heavy and unspoken: could we truly confront the past without being consumed by it? The rehearsal ended with a heavy silence, the weight of unspoken truths pressing on us all. Yet as we gathered our things and prepared to leave the ruins, a fragile sense of purpose lingered in the air, a small but vital spark against the encroaching night. Tomorrow we would face the fire again. But tonight the ashes held their secrets close, waiting for the dawn. The air inside the ruins was thick with dust and the faint scent of charred wood, remnants of a fire that seemed to have burned not just the theater, but the very spirit of everyone inside it. I stood near the cracked remnants of the stage, watching the scattered pieces of our broken troops struggle to find footing amid the rubble. The silence was brittle, and when Oliver finally spoke, it shattered like the splintered boards beneath our feet. "This is pointless," he snapped, voice sharp and raw with bitterness. "Pretending we can reclaim something that's long gone. The theater's ashes aren't a stage. They're a grave." His words struck me like a slap, harsh and unyielding. I met his gaze, the intensity in his eyes flickering like the dying embers of a fire. "It's not about reclaiming the past, Oliver," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "It's about facing it, about what we still have left to say." What we have left, he scoffed, pacing unevenly across the debris. You mean the skeletons of our failures? The ghosts that won't let us breathe. The room felt smaller, the crumbling walls closing in as tension thickened. Mara stepped between us, her presence a steadying force in the turmoil. Her hands, smudged with soot from tirelessly clearing debris, lifted in a gesture of peace. Enough, she said, her voice firm but gentle, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much to tolerate this disintegration. We all carry scars, but this is our chance to heal, not destroy each other. Oliver's jaw clenched, but he paused, the fire in his eyes dimming just enough to let reason seep in. I'm not trying to tear us apart, he muttered, voice thick with conflict. I don't know if I can keep pretending this will work. None of us can, Mara acknowledged, but quitting isn't the answer. We've come too far to let old wounds fester and ruin what little hope we have left. The room fell silent again, save for the soft crackle of settling ash under our feet. I glanced around at the faces weathered, wary, but still flickering with a fragile flame of determination. The theater, though broken, was still breathing through us. Later, as the others dispersed to gather their scattered energies, Oliver's absence pulled a weight into the room that was almost physical. Mara approached me quietly, her eyes steady and knowing. This isn't just about the play, she said softly. It's about the ghosts you both carry. The past isn't done with you yet. Her words resonated deep within, stirring a storm of memories I had tried to bury beneath layers of ash and regret. I found myself alone on the stage, the cavernous space echoing with silence and the whispers of what once was. The weight of failure pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. I sank to the floor, fingers tracing the cold, rough texture of a broken prop, the remnants of a mask once worn to hide truths I was now forced to face. The fire that had consumed the theater seemed to burn within me, still a relentless, consuming force. But beneath the ashes, faint embers glowed, fragile, waiting for breath to ignite them anew. Despite the fractures, the wounds, the bitterness, a small spark of hope flickered, fragile, yes, but real. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with peril. But if this broken troop could endure, if I could endure, perhaps the fire would not only destroy but transform. As I rose, the ghostly silence was broken by the distant creak of a door, footsteps tentative but returning. Oliver's shadow appeared at the threshold, a silent promise that despite the fissures, the play was far from over. The ashes might choke the past, but the stage, no matter how broken, still held the possibility of a new beginning. And so, the fight continued. The burnt timbers creaked faintly as the late afternoon sun slanted through the shattered windows, casting long, fractured shadows across the floor of the ruined theater. I stood near the center of the stage, dust motes swirling in the shafts of light, my thoughts heavy as the silence pressed in around me. The air still carried the scent of smoke and ash, a lingering residue of destruction that clung to everything, like a memory refusing to fade. It was then that she arrived. Jenna, a slight figure hesitating at the threshold, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and something I could not yet name, hope, perhaps. Her youthful face was unmarked by the wariness that time had carved into mine and those around me. She stepped inside cautiously, as if afraid the ruins might crumble beneath her feet, but her gaze was steady, curious. I watched her from the shadows, noting how the light caught her hair, turning it into a halo of golden strands. She looked at the broken seats, the blackened beams above, and then at me, as if weighing the madness of what we were attempting. Mara, ever the practical one, greeted her with a warm but measured smile, her soot-smudged hands brushing a stray lock of my hair back from my brow as she whispered something to steady my nerves. "You'll see," Mara said softly. "She's what we need." Jenna's first rehearsal was a tremulous thing. Her voice, clear and untested, cut through the oppressive silence like a tentative spark, fragile yet insistent. As she read her lines, there was an earnestness that stirred something long dormant within the cracked walls and within me. It was as if the theater itself inhaled, drawing in the sound, willing it to live again. Oliver, ever skeptical, watched her with narrowed eyes, lips pressed into a thin line. His cynicism was a wall I had grown accustomed to, yet even he could not entirely mask the flicker of interest Jenna's presence provoked. Mara, meanwhile, moved among us like a steady current, smoothing tensions and fostering a fragile camaraderie that had seemed impossible just days before. The rehearsals began to take on a different tone. Where before there had been only the weight of loss and resignation, now there was a tentative energy, a fragile pulse that threaded through our voices and gestures. Jenna's youthful enthusiasm challenged the older actors to recall the fire that once burned bright within them, even if that fire now flickered uncertainly. I found myself drawn to her spirit, a reminder of my own beginnings, before scandal and tragedy had cast me into shadow. Watching her, I glimpsed a possibility not of reclaiming what was lost, but of creating something new, born from the ashes rather than buried beneath them. One evening after a particularly long rehearsal, Mara pulled me aside. Her eyes were tired but resolute. "Don't let the past chain you down," she said quietly. "This isn't about reliving old glories, it's about what we can make now, together. Jenna's spark can light the way, if you let it." Her words echoed in the hollow spaces of my heart. Could I truly let go of the bitterness and fear that had become my constant companions? Could I embrace the vulnerability that this new path demanded? As I stood alone on the stage that night, the ruins around me seemed less like a prison and more like a canvas. And Jenna's spark, fragile, flickering, was the first stroke of color in a landscape long faded to gray. The fire that had once consumed us all still burned, not with destructive rage, but with the quiet promise of transformation. And for the first time in a long while, I dared to believe that from these ashes, something new might yet rise. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the shadows of the past still lingered, waiting to test the fragile hope Jenna had ignited. Could we hold on to this spark, or would it be snuffed out by doubt and despair? The answer lay in the work yet to come, in the voices we raised together, and in the courage to face what we could not change. For now, though, I allowed myself to feel not the weight of failure, but the lightness of possibility. And that, perhaps, was the most precious gift of all. As the echoes of Jenna's laughter drifted through the broken walls, I knew this was only the beginning. The stage was set, the players gathered, and somewhere deep inside me, a fragile flame was burning anew. But the night was far from over, and the ashes still held their secrets. What would tomorrow bring? The theater waited, breathless, for the next act. I settled onto a splintered bench, the wood rough beneath my fingers, the air thick with the scent of ash and dust that clings to every surface like a shroud. Before me rests a cracked mirror, its silver backing flecked and peeling, the glass fractured into jagged shards that fracture my reflection into 1,000 broken pieces. I stare long and hard, searching for the man I once was, the man I might still become. But the face that peers back at me is a stranger, gaunt-lined, eyes dulled by years of regret and failure. The theater around me groans in silence, a skeleton of its former glory. The charred beams loom like ghosts in the half-light, and the floor creaks beneath the weight of memories too heavy to bear. I feel the ghosts of applause, the echo of voices long stilled, and in their absence, a painful void that presses upon my chest. The past is an ever-present shadow here, a relentless specter that refuses to loosen its grip. I remember the night of the fire as if it were etched into the very walls, the heat, the crackling roar, the screams swallowed by smoke. My mistakes, my failures, they all burn as fiercely as the flames that consumed this place. Self-doubt gnaws at me, a constant companion whispering that I am unworthy, that this last play is a fool's errand. Yet beneath that despair, a flicker of something raw and stubborn refuses to die. Hope. From the shadowed corner, a soft rustle breaks my reverie. Mara's presence is quiet but resolute as she approaches, her soot-streaked hands folded carefully. She places a gentle hand on my shoulder, a small but profound gesture of solidarity. Her eyes, sharp and steady, meet mine without judgment. In that moment, the crushing weight of solitude lightens, if only slightly. Mara has been the backbone of this fractured family, the one who holds the pieces together when I am too lost to try. She doesn't offer empty comfort. Instead, she offers the hard truth we all need but rarely admit, that we are broken but not beyond repair. Before I can respond, the tension in the air thickens with a sudden burst of movement. Oliver storms in, his presence like a storm breaking over the ruins. His eyes blaze with frustration, his voice a harsh cut through the silence. "You're reliving in memories, not reality," he snaps, pacing the cracked floor, clinging to ghosts while the rest of us bleed for scraps of the future. When will you see that this place and this troupe needs more than your haunted nostalgia? His words sting, but beneath the anger lies a wounded pride, a desperate longing not so different from my own. The confrontation exposes the raw nerves beneath our fragile alliance, the unspoken fears and resentments bubbling to the surface. For a moment, the troupe seems on the verge of unraveling, the weight of old wounds threatening to crush us all. In the midst of this storm, Jenna steps forward, her voice barely above a whisper. She begins to recite a monologue we had rehearsed, her tone trembling but earnest. The words cut through the tension, fragile and tentative, as a new shoot breaking through scorched earth. Her youthful passion rekindles a spark within me, a reminder that even in ruin, life insists on pushing forward. The broken theatre becomes a crucible for renewal, the ashes fertile ground for something new and uncertain. As I watch Jenna, I realize that the path to redemption is not a reclaiming of past glory, but an acceptance of vulnerability. The scars we carry, visible and invisible, are part of the performance, part of the story we must tell. The theatre, like us, is fractured and imperfect, but in that imperfection lies a poignant truth. Tonight, as the shadows lengthen and the embers glow faintly beneath the rubble, I find a fragile hope taking root amid the ruins. The road ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in years, I am willing to walk it. The cracked mirror still waits, fragmented and distorted, but I no longer flinch when I meet my own gaze. Instead, I see a man haunted but not defeated, broken but not beyond repair. The past will always linger like smoke in the air, but it no longer suffocates me. I rise from the bench, the weight of memory still heavy but no longer paralyzing. The play must go on, imperfect and raw, a testament not to what was lost, but what might yet be found. And so, within these ruined walls, beneath a fractured sky, I step forward into the uncertainty, carrying the flickering flame of hope, a fragile light against the encroaching darkness. The night deepens around me, and somewhere, beyond the cracked walls, the future waits unwritten and unyielding. Yet, even as the silence settles once more, I know the hardest scenes are still to come. The echoes of my own footsteps barely disturbed the thick silence that had settled over the ruins of the theatre. Each step crunched softly against the ash-strewn floorboards, a brittle reminder of the fire that had stolen so much from us all. Yet here we were, poised on the edge of something fragile, something that might still flicker to life despite the ruin. Oliver's presence backstage was as palpable as the dust in the air. He stood with his back to me, shoulders hunched beneath a threadbare coat, the weight of something heavier than the crumbling walls bearing down on him. I watched him fumble in the dim light, a quick, furtive movement, the faint clink of glass. My heart tightened. "Oliver," I called quietly, but the name hung between us uncertain and sharp. He spun to face me, eyes wild, darting. Not now," he snapped, his voice cracking on the edges. I stepped closer, voice low but steady. "We need you here, all of you. Not just the shadow you bring with you." He laughed, bitter and hollow. "You don't know what it's like, do you? To carry this weight. To feel like you re-drowning in what you once were." The words stung, the rawness of his pain cutting through the fragile hopes we'd nurtured. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but the chasm between us yawned too wide. Mara appeared then, stepping between us, hands suit-streaked but steady. "Enough," she said softly, but with the authority that demanded attention. "We all broken here. But this fight won't rebuild anything." Oliver's eyes flickered with a moment of clarity before the storm returned. "You think your grand vision can save us? Save me. I'm drowning, and you standing on the shore, watching." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I'm still here," I said quietly. "If you want to sink, I'll go down with you. But if you want to fight," he cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Fight. The fire took everything. Maybe it took you too far gone." The air between us thickened, heavy with years of regret and unspoken blame. But then Mara's steady presence reminded me of the fragile thread that still held us together. Rehearsals continued, though shadows lengthened over our efforts. Oliver's struggles became more visible, missed lines, shaky voice, the tremor that betrayed his internal battle. One evening, as the light faded and the ruins grew colder, he stepped forward for his monologue, his figure framed by the broken archway. His voice faltered at first, raw and ragged, but then found a fragile strength. Tears mingled with the grime on his face as he poured out his anguish and yearning, the ruined theater bearing silent witness to his desperate plea for redemption. The room was still when he finished, the silence heavy with the weight of what had been confessed, both on stage and off. I met his gaze, and in that moment we were not rivals or failures, but two broken men seeking some semblance of grace amidst the ashes. But the path ahead was uncertain. The wounds were deep, and the fire within Oliver was both his curse and his fuel. As the night drew on, I knew the coming days would test not only our play but the very bonds that held this fragile troupe together. Could we rise from these ashes, or would the past consume us all? The answer lay somewhere in the smoldering ruins, waiting to be found. The charred beams of the ruined theater groaned softly in the cool evening air, their blackened edges catching the last amber fingers of sunlight as they reached like skeletal hands toward a bruised sky. The scent of ash and dust lay thick, a constant reminder of the fire that had torn through this place, severing the lifeblood of our dreams. Amid the rubble, voices rose sharp, fractious, and raw, carving the silence with the weight of old wounds and fresh frustrations. It was in this crucible that Mara stood, unyielding and fierce, the steady heart of a troupe teetering on the edge of collapse. I watched her from the worn shadows of the side wings, her figure sharp against the gloom. Her hands, perpetually smudged with soot, clutched a crumpled script as if it were a lifeline. Her eyes, steady and bright, scanned the scattered group before her. Oliver, his jaw clenched tight, eyes flashing with a mix of defiance and pain. Jenna, the youngest among us, her hands trembling slightly, lips pressed thin as she tried to hold herself together. And the others, caught in the web of tension tightening like a noose. Enough, Mara's voice cut through the murmurs like a bell tolling in a quiet cathedral. It was neither loud nor harsh, but it carried the weight of authority forged in years of hardship and heartbreak. We all came here because this play means something. It's not just about the lines or the spotlight. It's about who we are now, broken, yes, but still here, still fighting. Oliver's snarl was immediate, fighting. "We were barely holding on, Mara. You call this progress? Look around. The place is falling apart, and so are we." Her gaze didn't waver. "Then we stop pretending it's easy. We stop blaming each other. This isn't just some rehearsal space, it's our home, our story. And if we tear each other apart, there won't be anything left to save." The room fell into a brittle silence, broken only by the distant creak of a weakened beam settling. Mara's words planted a seed, fragile but unmistakable amidst the rubble of doubt. Later, backstage in the cramped shadow of a tattered curtain, Mara knelt beside Jenna, who sat clutching a frayed script. The girl's cheeks were flushed, eyes wide with a blend of awe and fear. Mara's soot-streaked fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from Jenna's face, her voice softening. "You're doing fine," she said quietly. "It's okay to be scared. That means you care. But don't let it freeze you. Let it burn, let it drive you." Jenna nodded slowly, a tentative smile flickering like a fragile flame. "I want to believe we can do this." Mara's smile was brief but genuine. "We can, one step at a time." Meanwhile, I found myself drawn to Mara's unwavering presence. Her fierce pragmatism was a balm to my own wavering spirit. I, who had wandered these ruins haunted by ghosts of my failures, now saw in her a kindling hope that perhaps from the ashes something new might yet rise. The tension flared again when Oliver's temper snapped during a tense discussion over a scene's direction. His voice cracked with frustration. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about the play anymore. It's about survival, and some of us are barely hanging on." Mara met his gaze head-on, her voice sharp but steady. "And that's exactly why we can't afford to fall apart now. We need each other more than ever. You're not alone in this, Oliver. But if you keep pushing us away, you'll lose what little we've got left." The room held its breath as Oliver's glare softened, the fight draining from his posture. Mara's words, though hard, were rooted in a fierce loyalty that none could deny. As the rehearsal resumed, the atmosphere shifted, still fragile, but somehow more cohesive. Mara's strength had woven a tentative thread of unity through our fractured group, binding us with shared purpose, even as shadows of doubt lingered. I found myself reflecting on the paradox of this ruined stage, how destruction had stripped us bare, yet also laid the foundation for something honest and raw. Mara embodied that paradox, scarred but unbroken, fierce yet nurturing. She was the axis upon which our fragile world turned. That night, as the cold seeped through the broken windows and the troop dispersed into the darkening city, I lingered a moment longer. The silence around me was no longer oppressive but expectant, filled with the quiet hum of possibility. Mara's strength was not just a shield, it was a beacon. And as I turned away from the ruins, the embers of hope glimmered faintly in the ash-streaked twilight, promising that from this crucible of despair, we might yet forge something enduring. But the path ahead was uncertain, and the weight of our pasts still pressed heavily. Would Mara's steady hand be enough to hold us together when the next storm came? Could I, battered and broken, find the strength to follow her lead and face the ghosts that haunted us all? The answer lay somewhere beyond the darkness, waiting to be discovered in the fragile moments between despair and hope on this ashen stage where we dared to perform, not just for an audience, but for ourselves. The night deepened, and with it, the fragile promise of a dawn yet to come. The acrid scent of smoke still lingered faintly in the air, a ghostly remnant that clung stubbornly to the charred wood and cracked plaster. Standing on the ruined stage, I felt the weight of silence pressing in around me, broken only by the occasional crackle of a stubborn ember, glowing faintly in the shadows. The skeleton of the theater, stripped bare by fire, seemed to breathe with a slow, mournful rhythm, a heartbeat of loss etched into every splintered beam and fallen curtain. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness settle deep within me, and suddenly the past surged forward with a force that stole my breath. The memory unfurled like smoke curling through the air, a night of reckless hope, of careless whispers and forgotten warnings. I saw the flames licking hungrily at the hastily stacked scenery, the panic in the faces around me, the frantic scramble for safety. But beneath the chaos, beneath the terror, there was a deeper truth I had long buried. The accident was not just fate, but a failure born of my own negligence. A moment of distraction, a spark ignited by a careless hand mine. The realization hit me like a blow, raw and unforgiving, searing through the fragile veneer I had so desperately clung to. I was not just a victim of the fire, but its unwitting architect. Shaken, I opened my eyes to the crumbling ruins, the charred remains of what had once been a place of dreams and applause. The ghosts of past performances whispered through the air, their voices a chorus of regret and longing. I could feel their presence pressing close, urging me to confront the truth I had evaded for so long. The fire was not merely a destructive force. It was a crucible, a terrible forge that had burned away illusions and left only raw, aching reality. Mara approached quietly, her footsteps soft but purposeful on the cracked floor. Her soot-smudged hands were clenched at her sides, and her eyes held a steady, unflinching gaze. "You can't keep hiding in the shadows," she said softly, her voice a mixture of compassion and quiet strength. "The troop needs to know. We all do." Her words hung in the air like a fragile promise, fragile but necessary. I hesitated, the weight of years pressing down, but finally nodded. The truth was a wound we could no longer avoid. Later, during a tense rehearsal break, Oliver's frustration boiled over. His intense eyes flashed with anger and pain as he paced near the scorched wall, his voice cutting sharply through the stillness. "Why didn't you tell us? Why keep us in the dark? We were supposed to be a family, but you've been carrying this alone, like some damn secret curse." I met his gaze, the bitterness in his tone a mirror of my own torment. I was scared, I admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Scared that if I told the truth, everything would fall apart. Oliver's expression softened for a moment, but the tension lingered, a reminder that the past was not easily laid to rest. In the quiet that followed, Jenna stood nearby, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and empathy. She had joined us recently, a bright spark amid the ashes, her youthful hope a balm against the encroaching darkness. When I shared a fragmented memory of that terrible night, the crackling flames, the desperate rush to escape, the hollow silence left behind, she listened intently. Her presence a tender reminder of what we still had to fight for. The flickering shadows cast by the remaining stage lights danced like ghosts across her face, embodying the theater's tortured past and our fragile hope for renewal. "We were not just rebuilding a play," she said softly. "We were rebuilding ourselves." Her words echoed in the silence, a quiet defiance against the weight of memory and loss. That night, as the others drifted into restless sleep in the makeshift quarters among the ruins, I remained on the stage, staring up at the fractured ceiling where the stars peeked through the gaps. The fire had taken so much from me, my career, my reputation, my peace. But it had also left behind a crucible in which something new might yet be forged. The past was a shadow that would always follow, but it need not define the path ahead. To move forward, I had to embrace the full truth, the guilt, the pain, the mistakes, and transform them into something honest and raw. The play we were about to perform was more than a final act. It was a reckoning, a confession, a fragile hope. As embers smoldered quietly beneath my feet, I whispered a vow to the ghosts of this broken place. I would no longer run from the shadows. I would face them head-on, and in doing so, perhaps find the redemption I sought, not in fame, but in truth. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, casting pale light through the shattered windows. The ruins were silent, but within their broken bones stirred a new resolve. Tomorrow we would rehearse again, not just to perform, but to remember, to heal, and to reclaim what fire had tried to destroy. And so the shadows of the past fell around me, heavy yet strangely comforting, a reminder that even in ruin, there is the possibility of rebirth. The stage, scorched and scarred, awaited its players, and I, at last, was ready to step into the light. The air inside the ruined theater was thick with dust and tension, the remnants of charred wood and torn velvet hanging like ghosts around us. We had gathered once more for rehearsal, but beneath the fragile hope lay a fault line, ready to split open with the slightest tremor. Oliver's voice cut sharply through the silence, a knife hunned by bitterness and exhaustion. "This isn't theater," he spat, pacing the cracked floorboards. "It's a funeral procession for something dead. You want to relive ghosts? Fine, but don't expect me to pretend it means anything anymore." I felt the weight of his words like a blow to my chest. His cynicism had always been a jagged edge, but today it felt like the abyss itself. Mara stepped forward, her soot-smudged hands raised in an attempt at peace. "Oliver, please, this isn't helping. We need to pull together, not tear each other apart." Her voice was steady but strained, the fatigue clear in her eyes. I looked around the room. Jenna sat clutching a script, her youthful face pale but resolute. The others exchanged uneasy glances, caught between loyalty and doubt. The theater, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage closing in on us all. Peace. Oliver sneered, turning on Mara with a glare. You call this peace? Hiding behind platitudes while everything burns down around us. The accusation hung in the air, heavier than the ashes underfoot. I opened my mouth to respond, to quell the rising storm, but the words tangled in my throat. The memories pressed in flashes of fire and failure, the scandal that shattered my life, the faces of those I had lost. I stumbled back toward the balcony, seeking refuge in the shadows. The shattered railings framed a view of the empty seats beyond, rows of darkness swallowing the faint glow of the evening sky. I leaned forward, the cold bite of the night air mingling with the hot, suffocating despair inside me. How had it come to this? A troupe once bound by dreams now unraveling before my eyes. The play, my last hope for redemption, teetered on the edge of collapse. The fire that had consumed this theater years ago seemed to have ignited anew inside me, inside us all. Below, Mara's voice rose again, softer this time, weaving between the shards of anger and disappointment. We were not done yet. Not if we can help it. I closed my eyes, the weight of failure and regret threatening to crush me. A voice whispered from the depths of memory, fragile but insistent. Was it hope, or merely the echo of a dream slipping through my fingers? A faint sound stirred behind me, a soft shuffle, the careful gathering of scattered scripts and broken props. Jenna's small hands moved with delicate purpose, a quiet defiance against the chaos engulfing us. In that moment, her presence was a fragile flame flickering in the darkness, a reminder that even in ruin, something might still be salvaged. But as the night deepened, and the voices below edged toward silence, I faced a stark truth. This might be the breaking point. The question lingered, heavy and unanswered. Could I find the strength to pull us back from the edge, or would this final performance end not with a curtain call, but with an irrevocable fall? The ruins seemed to hold their breath, waiting for my answer. I sat alone in the shadows of the burnt-out theater, the air thick with dust and the faint, acrid smell of smoldering wood. The wreckage around me was a familiar weight, a physical manifestation of the ruin I felt within. The night had swallowed the day's disastrous rehearsal whole, leaving me with nothing but the damp ache of failure and the cold sting of despair. My hands trembled slightly as I rested them on a splintered bench, the rough wood biting into my skin through the thin fabric of my sleeves. Somewhere distant, a faint crackle of embers whispered its mournful song, and the scorched curtains, tattered and grey, stirred in a restless breeze that slipped through the ruined roof. I closed my eyes and let the silence stretch, thick and unwelcome. The ghosts of past performances floated just beyond reach, their echoes teasing the edges of my mind. Faces once bright with applause, scenes once alive with fire and passion, all reduced now to flickers behind closed lids. It was tempting to let those ghosts consume me, to sink into the comfort of old memories, but tonight they felt like shackles, pulling me deeper into the mire of regret. A soft rustle broke the stillness. Mara's silhouette appeared in the faint glow of the exit's emergency light, her footsteps deliberate but gentle. She approached quietly, her soot-streaked hands folded in front of her as if holding herself together, just as firmly as she held the troupe. "You can't stay here all night," she said softly, her voice steady like the steady breath of the theater itself. "We need you, we all do." I opened my eyes, meeting her gaze. There was no pity there, only a fierce, pragmatic care that cut through the fog of my self-doubt. "I don't know if I have anything left to give," I admitted, voice rough with disuse. Mara shook her head, stepping closer. "It's not about giving what you had before. It's about what you have now, the truth you willing to show, the scars you willing to reveal. That's what makes this play real. That's what makes it worth doing." Her words settled over me like a fragile balm, but the knot in my chest tightened again as the heavy door creaked open. Oliver entered, his eyes sharp, his presence like a storm barely contained. "Truth, huh?" he said, voice low, edged with bitterness. Funny how you talk about that when you're the one who's buried it all. The tension between us sparked instantly, a thin thread stretched taut over years of shared regrets and unspoken blame. You think I don't know what I've done? I retorted, the pain surfacing raw and immediate. You think I don't feel the fire I started, the destruction I left behind? Oliver's gaze flickered with something softer, almost sorrowful. We've all got fires, he said quietly. Some burn us down, some light the way. But you've got to stop running from yours. The words struck a chord deep inside me, resonating with the flickering embers of hope Mara had kindled earlier. I swallowed hard, the bitterness in my throat loosening just enough to breathe. In that moment, surrounded by the ruin and the ghosts of my former life, I understood that the play was never meant to be a resurrection of past glory. It was a reckoning, a chance to stand naked before the audience of my own memories and fears, to speak truths that had long been buried beneath ash and silence. I rose unsteadily, the weight of despair lifting slightly as I moved toward the center of the broken stage. The broken boards beneath my feet creaked in protest, but I felt steadier than I had in weeks. The pale light of dusk filtered through the collapsed roof, casting long shadows and painting the ruins in soft, melancholy hues. The theater's scars mirrored my own, jagged, imperfect, yet undeniably real. I whispered to the emptiness, this is where we begin again. Not with perfection, but with honesty. Not with the illusion of control, but with the courage to be vulnerable. Mara and Oliver joined me, their faces illuminated by the fading light and the fragile hope blooming between us. In that circle of broken souls, amidst the ashes and echoes, I felt the first true stirrings of redemption. It was not a grand salvation, but a quiet acceptance, a fragile resurgence born from the very fire that had once threatened to consume us all. Together, we would finish this play, imperfect and raw, as a testament not to what we had lost, but to what we were still willing to become. And in that truth, I found the strength to carry on. The air inside the ruined theater was thick with dust, and the faintest scent of smoke that never quite left the charred timbers. The scattered remnants of the once grand stage creaked softly underfoot as we gathered again, a hesitant assembly bound by threads of old memories and fresh resolve. I stood near the center, eyes tracing the cracked proscenium arch, a silent witness to both destruction and rebirth. Mara was the first to break the silence, her voice low but steady. We can't pretend it's never happened, but maybe we can make something honest from it. Her words hung in the air like fragile glass, catching the light from the cracked skylight above. Oliver shifted uneasily, his usual cynicism tempered by an unfamiliar softness. I don't know if I can do this, he admitted, eyes darting to the scattered scripts at our feet. But I want to try. For what it's worth. Jenna's gaze was bright, untainted by the bitterness that clung to the rest of us. She fiddled nervously with the hem of her jacket, a symbol of hope threading through the ashes. We formed a loose circle, bodies tense, but seeking connection. Mara suggested we each share what the play meant to us now, not as a means to an end, but as a shared journey. Hesitations gave way to confessions. I spoke of the guilt that had shadowed each step, the silence that followed my fall. Oliver revealed his battles with addiction, the nights when the bottle was the only audience he could face. Jenna spoke of dreams reborn amidst decay, and Mara of loyalty that outlasted the flames. As the words spilled out, the theater seemed to breathe with us, the cracks in walls and floorboards no longer just scars but reminders of survival. We began to see the play not as a polished show but as a living thing, fragile and flawed, yet fiercely alive. Rehearsals resumed with a new spirit. I stumbled through my lines at first, the weight of memory threatening to crush the fragile hope. But then, as I spoke a pivotal monologue, something shifted. The words were no longer an echo of past glories. They were a raw, trembling truth. The others listened, caught in the fragile web of shared pain and tentative trust. Oliver's confrontation with his own demons came unexpectedly one evening. His voice broke as he admitted past failures. The silence that followed was thick, but not condemning. Slowly, applause, not just polite but genuine, broke out, a fragile bridge between us. Mara's presence remained a quiet anchor, her hands steady as she adjusted lighting from the broken rig, her voice firm yet kind as she guided us through moments of doubt. In these reclaimed moments, the theatre ceased to be a tomb of memories and became a crucible of transformation. We were no longer actors fleeing from ghosts, but creators shaping a new narrative from the ashes. Yet beneath the surface, uncertainty lingered. Could this fragile resurgence endure the inevitable trials? Was the play enough to redeem us, or merely a fleeting illusion? As the light faded and rehearsal ended, I found myself staring upward into the broken ceiling, the night sky a canvas of possibility. The fire that once destroyed us now flickered within, a fragile flame of hope waiting to be stoked into life. We would rise again not as the shadows of our former selves, but as something new, shaped by loss, honesty, and the courage to perform our truths. The stage was set imperfect and vulnerable, much like ourselves. The play, our fragile resurgence, had begun. The morning light filtered weakly through the shattered windows of the theatre, casting long, fractured shadows over the ash-strewn floor. Jenna stood in the center of the ruined stage, her figure small but resolute against the vast, skeletal remains of what once had been a place of grandeur. Her voice broke the eerie silence, raw and trembling at first, but growing steadier with each word. She spoke lines of passion and despair, her youthful energy filling the hollow shell with a fragile vitality. I watched from the back, leaning against a crumbling pillar, my heart caught somewhere between admiration and envy. There was something about her, a flame untouched by the smoke of failure and loss that clung to these walls to me. As her words echoed, I felt ghosts stir in the dust, memories of my own younger self, full of fire and reckless hope. The ache of what I'd lost pressed against my ribs, but amidst it all, a faint flicker of something new took root. When Jenna finished, the silence that followed was not empty but charged, as if the theatre itself held its breath. Mara approached quietly, her footsteps careful on the uneven floor. She placed a steadying hand on Jenna's shoulder and spoke softly, her voice a blend of encouragement and caution. "It's a brave heart you have, Jenna. But passion alone won't hold this troupe together. We need discipline, patience, the hard work behind the scenes." Jenna nodded, eyes shining with a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. I caught Mara's glance, the subtle way her gaze swept the room, measuring the fragile bonds holding us all together. It was a reminder hope was not enough. It must be tempered with realism. Oliver lingered nearby, arms crossed, his sharp gaze fixed on Jenna. For a moment, his usual cynicism softened, revealing a vulnerability beneath the rough exterior. He stepped forward, his voice low but sincere. "That scene you reworking on, the one where the character confronts loss. Try to feel it, not just say the words. Let it break you a little." Jenna's eyes met his, a spark of understanding passing between them. It was a rare moment of connection, fragile but genuine. The tension that had threatened to fracture us seemed to ease, replaced by a tentative camaraderie. As the day wore on, the troupe moved with a new rhythm, each rehearsal a quiet battle against the shadows of our past. Jenna's enthusiasm was infectious, a beacon cutting through the gloom. I found myself drawn out of my shell, sharing memories, offering guidance, feeling the weight of despair lift, however slightly. When night came, the theatre was no longer just a ruin. It was a place where hope flickered, fragile, imperfect, but undeniable. And as I left the stage, the echo of Jenna's voice lingering in the air, I dared to believe that perhaps this broken company could rise from the ashes. Not as ghosts of former glory, but as something new, something real. But even as the embers of hope glowed, the chill of uncertainty crept in. Could this fragile spark survive the coming trials? Could we all learn to trust again, to embrace the vulnerability that true redemption demanded? The answers lay ahead, waiting in the shadows of the burnt stage, where past and future would collide once more. And so the play continued, not just on the stage, but in the hearts of those who dared to dream amidst ruins. The late afternoon sun filtered through the shattered panes of the theatre's once grand windows, casting slanting beams of light across the floor, mottled with ash and scattered debris. Frank moved cautiously among the ruins, his steps deliberate and unhurried, as though the ground beneath him were sacred soil rather than the hollowed remains of a stage. His hands, rough and veined, reached out now and then to brush against charred beams or the splintered remains of props, each touch seeming to anchor him to the memories embedded within the decayed wood. I watched him from the edge of the room, the weight of the past pressing against my chest like a stone. Frank was an old man, his grey hair tousled by the breeze slipping through the broken roof, and his eyes held a sharpness that belied his age. He had been tending to this place long before I had fallen from grace and long before the fire had stolen the theatre's life. There was a quiet strength in him, a resilience that seemed to echo the very bones of the building. Mara stood beside me, her arms crossed, soot smudges darkening her sleeves. She too had welcomed Frank's arrival. His presence was a balm amid the discord that had recently threatened to unravel us. "He's been here through everything," she said softly. "If anyone can remind us what this place means beyond the ruin, it's him." Frank turned towards us, a faint smile creasing the corners of his mouth. "It's not just the bricks and boards," he said slowly, voice gravelly but steady. "It's the stories we carry in the cracks, the echoes in the silence. This place remembers, and so must we." We gathered near the backstage entrance, the remnants of curtains and props strewn about like forgotten dreams. Frank began to recount tales of the theatre's high day of opening nights, filled with laughter and applause, of the sweat and tears poured into each performance, of the hands that had shaped every corner of this space. His stories were not grandiose. They were humble recollections, steeped in a love that transcended the physical decay. "I remember the night the fire started," he said quietly, eyes distant. "We thought it was the end, but fire changes things. It burns away the old, yes, but it also clears the way for something new." His words struck a chord deep within me. For so long I had seen the fire only as a destroyer, an unrelenting force that had torn apart my career, my dignity, and this sacred place. Yet here was Frank, framing it as a transformation, a painful but necessary passage. Mara nodded thoughtfully. "That's why we re-here," she said. "Not just to perform, but to keep the spirit alive. To show that even in ruin, there's something worth fighting for." I found myself inhaling deeply, the stale air of the theatre mingling with the faint scent of smoke and dust. Frank reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small lantern, its glass smudged but intact. Lighting the wick, he held it aloft, the flame flickering tentatively but unwavering. The glow cast dancing shadows on the cracked walls, illuminating the faded grandeur and the scars alike. "Light," Frank murmured, "is what we need. Not to erase the darkness, but to find our way through it." We stood together in the growing dusk, the fragile flame between us a quiet symbol of hope and endurance. It was not a grand gesture, nor a promise of easy redemption, but it was enough a beacon to guide us through the uncertainty ahead. That night, as I lay beneath a tattered curtain that served as my bed, Frank's words echoed in my mind. The theatre was more than ruins and ashes. It was a vessel of memory, a testament to the resilience of those who loved it. And perhaps, in embracing the fragility of this place and ourselves, we could find a new kind of strength. Morning came with a chill and the thin light of early dawn. Frank was already at work, clearing debris, patching fragile sections of the stage, and setting broken chairs upright. Mara joined him, and I followed, feeling the weight of purpose settle over me like a cloak. The tasks were small, mundane even, but in their repetition, I sensed a ritual of healing. Throughout the day, Frank shared more wisdom, not in grand speeches but in quiet moments, a nod towards a beam that still held firm. a reminder to tread lightly on the weakened floorboards, a story about a forgotten actor who had once found solace here. His presence was a tether, grounding us amidst the swirling memories and the uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm. By evening, the troupe had gathered again, their faces tired but determined. Frank's lantern was placed center stage, its flame steady in the encroaching gloom. Mara spoke then, her voice carrying the weight of shared experience. "We not just rebuilding a play," she said. "We rebuilding ourselves. And this place, broken as it is, holds the pieces." The words settled over us, a quiet affirmation that the path ahead, though fraught with doubt and pain, was ours to walk. The caretaker's wisdom had rekindled something fragile but essential, a belief that from the ashes, something enduring could still arise. As I looked around at the faces illuminated by the soft lantern light, I understood that the true performance was not only the play we would put on, but the act of survival itself. In the ruins, amidst the ghosts and memories, we were crafting a new story, one of acceptance, resilience, and tentative hope. And with that thought, I felt the first stirrings of peace. Yet even as the flame flickered steady, I knew the trials ahead would test us still. The past was never far behind, and the stage we sought to reclaim was as fragile as the hopes we dared to nurture. But for now, in the quiet company of a caretaker and a few kindred souls, the theater breathed once more. The night whispered around us, carrying with it the promise of dawn. The air inside the skeletal remains of the theater was thick with dust and anticipation. We gathered beneath the fractured ceiling, the charred beams above us like ribs of some long-dead beast, exposed to the cold sky. The silence was almost reverent, broken only by the soft scraping of feet on the cracked floor and the occasional murmur of a line rehearsed too many times. We were here for the final rehearsal, the last time we would test the fragile threads of our collective hope, before the play unfolded before an audience, however small or captive that audience might be. I stood at center stage, the ghost of the spotlight above me long extinguished, but the weight of its absence somehow heavier than its presence ever was. My hands trembled slightly as I clutched the worn script, its edges softened by countless fingers and the passage of time. I could feel the eyes of Mara, Oliver, Jenna, and the others on me, each carrying their own fears and hopes like fragile glass waiting to be shattered or saved. "Let's begin," Mara said softly, her voice steady despite the tension that rippled through the group. Her soot-streaked hands rested lightly on her hips, a silent promise that she was here to hold us together no matter the storm. I nodded and took a breath, stepping into my role, letting the words wash over me as they had so many times before. But this time, the lines felt different. They carried the weight of every memory, every failure, every ember of hope left smoldering within me. The theater, broken and scarred as it was, seemed to breathe with us, alive in its own way. A living monument to what had been lost, and what might yet be reclaimed. Midway through the scene, my voice faltered as a surge of memory overwhelmed me, the flames licking at the old curtains, the frantic scramble backstage, the faces of those who had vanished into the smoke. I paused, the script slipping from my fingers, and turned to look at the others. My voice cracked, raw and unguarded. "I'm afraid. Afraid that this is all I have left, these ruins, these ghosts." The silence that followed was not empty but full of understanding, the kind that only comes from shared pain. Oliver stepped forward then, his eyes fierce but gentle. "We're all afraid," he said quietly, "but maybe fear is what keeps us honest, keeps us real." His words broke something open inside me, a door I'd kept locked tight for years. I let the vulnerability spill out, no longer hiding behind the veneer of control or the mask of the fallen star. We were flawed, broken, and scared. But in that brokenness lay a truth more powerful than any polished performance. Mara moved among us, her presence a balm. She whispered encouragement, adjusted a misplaced prop, and reminded us of the strength in unity. Jenna watched with wide eyes, her youthful energy a spark we all needed, a sign that this story was not just about endings but beginnings too. The final scene approached, and with it, the culmination of our shared journey. Oliver and I exchanged a glance, no words, just a silent acknowledgement that the past was not something to be conquered, but understood, embraced. As the rehearsal drew to a close, the weight in my chest lightened, just enough to let a fragile hope take root. We were ready, not perfect, not healed, but ready to step into the light together, to perform among the ashes, and find something worth holding on to. Tomorrow, I said, voice steady now, we show them who we are, not who we were, but who we can still become. And in that moment, beneath the broken rafters and fading echoes, I believed it was enough. The final rehearsal ended not with applause, but with a quiet resolve, a fragile promise that we would face whatever came next with open eyes and open hearts. The fire that had once consumed us now illuminated a path forward, uncertain but honest, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the faintest flicker of peace. Yet as the last light dimmed and shadows lengthened across the stage, a whispered question lingered in the air: could we truly rise from these ashes? Or was this fragile hope destined to burn away before dawn? The answer, I knew, would come not in certainty but in the act of stepping forward, line by trembling line, toward whatever awaited us beyond the ruins. The night air was thick with the scent of ash and damp wood as we gathered beneath the shattered rafters of the theatre. The sky above was a patchwork of stars, faint and flickering, much like the candlelight we had painstakingly arranged to illuminate the stage that was no longer whole. The cracked floorboards creaked beneath our feet, each step a reminder of the theatre's fallen glory. And yet here we were, a motley assembly of lost souls and forgotten voices, ready to bear ourselves before an audience that had come not for spectacle, but for truth. I stood just behind the tattered curtain, the fabric heavy with soot and dust, my hands trembling ever so slightly as I adjusted my faded jacket. My reflection caught in a shard of broken glass nearby was a ghost of the man I once was, worn, haunted, and yet stubbornly alive. Mara gave me a firm nod from across the stage, her soot-smudged hands steady and reassuring. Oliver paced with restless energy, his intense eyes flashing beneath the theatre's skeletal beams, while Jenna stood quietly, her bright gaze a small flame against the darkness. Frank lingered near the entrance, his weathered face calm, a silent sentinel of this hallowed ruin. The murmurs of the audience filtered through the open walls, a mix of familiar faces and curious strangers drawn by the whispered promise of resurrection. As the first notes of silence settled, I took a deep breath and stepped forward, the residual chill biting through my threadbare shirt. Our play was no grand production, no glittering spectacle to dazzle and distract, but it was ours, raw, ragged, and trembling with the weight of memory. The opening lines floated through the stillness, voices hesitant yet gathering strength with each word. I felt the fragile pulse of life in the ruins, the ghosts of applause long past replaced by an intimacy far more profound. Oliver's voice cut through the silence, ragged and trembling, a confession laid bare. His monologue was a torrent of pain and regret, each syllable a shard of shattered dreams. The audience sat breathless. I could feel their collective heart-hatch mingling with ours, a communion forged in vulnerability. Jenna followed, her youthful vigor a beacon amid the charred shadows. Her presence sparked something within us all, a reminder that from ash, new flames might yet arise. The scenes unfolded with uneven grace, imperfections laid bare like scars, each misstep a testament to our humanity. There were moments of silence, so thick they seemed to carry the weight of the past, and moments of laughter, fragile and unexpected, threading hope through the darkness. As the final act drew to a close, we stood together on that fractured stage, breathless and exposed. The applause that followed was hesitant at first, then swelling a tide of gratitude for the honesty we dared to reveal. In that moment I felt it, a quiet peace settling over me, not born of triumph or fame, but of acceptance. Redemption, I realized, was not reclaiming what was lost, but embracing the truth of who we were: flawed, broken, yet undeniably alive. The embers of the fire that had once consumed this place still glowed faintly in the ruins, a reminder of destruction and transformation intertwined. Tonight, we had performed not just a play but a reckoning, a fragile resurgence of hope born from the ashes. And as the curtain fell, I knew this was not an end, but a beginning, however uncertain, however tentative. The audience lingered, voices hushed, reluctant to disturb the fragile magic that hung in the air. Mara caught my eye and smiled, fierce and nurturing as ever. Oliver's gaze softened, a silent apology and acknowledgement passing between us. Jenna's bright eyes shone with promise, a spark that might yet kindle a new flame. And Frank, steady as the earth beneath us, nodded with quiet approval. I exhaled slowly, the weight of years lifting ever so slightly. The stage, though broken, had become a sanctuary once more, a place where memory and performance intertwined, where redemption was not a prize but a journey. As the night deepened and shadows stretched long across the ruins, I found myself whispering a silent vow to carry this fragile hope forward, to live with the scars and the light they held. And somewhere in the darkness, the ghosts of old performances seemed to whisper back, not with accusation, but with understanding, an echo of forgiveness carried on the wind. The ashes would never vanish, but neither would the fire within. And so, beneath the shattered sky and flickering candlelight, we stepped off the stage and into the uncertain dawn, fragile, flawed, and free. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that follows a storm, or in this case, a performance that had felt more like a rite of passage than a mere play. I found myself wandering through the ruins of the theater, the charred skeleton of the place that had once been my pride and my prison. Dawn's pale light filtered through the broken windows, casting soft, golden hues over the ash-strewn floor. Dust motes hovered, catching the light like tiny embers suspended in the air, fragile remnants of a fire that had once roared with destructive fury, now transformed into something delicate, almost sacred. I paused in the center of the stage, the boards beneath my feet scarred and splintered, but still standing. The echoes of applause, laughter, and tears seemed to ripple faintly in the silence, whispers of a past that felt both distant and intimately close. I closed my eyes and breathed in the scent of smoke and soot mingled with the faintest trace of old wood and fabric, the ghosts of countless performances etched into every surface. The play was over, imperfect, raw, but honest. I could still feel the weight of each line spoken, the tremor in my voice as I confronted the shadows of my failures and the fragile hope that had carried me through the rehearsals. The troupe had given everything: their pain, their regrets, their lingering dreams, and in return, we had created something that felt more like a confession than entertainment. A confession that had freed us, if only briefly, from the chains of memory and loss. Footsteps approached, soft but steady. I turned to see Mara emerging from the backstage ruins, her soot-smudged hands folded quietly before her. The lines on her face were softer in the morning light, but her eyes held the unwavering strength I had come to rely on. "You did well," she said simply, her voice low but steady. I managed a faint smile. "So did we." She nodded, stepping closer, and for a moment, the weight of everything we had endured seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile sense of companionship. Mara's presence was a balm, practical, grounding, yet fiercely nurturing. "It's not the end," she said, almost as if reading my thoughts. "Not for the theater, not for us." I looked back toward the empty seats, the ruined balconies, the shattered remnants of the past. No, not the end, just a different beginning. As if summoned by the words, Oliver appeared from the side of the stage, his disheveled hair catching the morning light, eyes sharp but tired. The tension between us was still palpable, a residue of years of conflict and unspoken truths. "Not bad," he remarked, voice rough but sincere. "For all the chaos, you pulled it through." I nodded, meeting his gaze. "We pulled it through." He shifted, glancing at the scattered scripts and broken props around us. "I'm sorry for everything." The words hung between us, fragile and tentative. I swallowed the lump in my throat and offered him a small, honest smile. Me too. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but a bridge, fragile but real. From the shadows of the wings, Jenna's clear voice rose softly, rehearsing lines she had taken to heart. She stood alone on the charred stage, her youthful energy a stark contrast to the decay around her. Her voice was steady, hopeful, as if she was carrying the future in her breath. I watched her for a long moment, the quiet realization settling deep within me. The fire that had destroyed so much had also cleared the way for something new. Something raw, honest, and unafraid. Frank, the caretaker, appeared then, his weathered face thoughtful as he carried a small metal drum to the side of the stage. He struck a match, and a gentle flame flickered to life, casting warm light that danced on the cracked walls and soot-blackened beams. We gathered there for a moment, 5 souls linked by loss, hope, and the fragile embers of renewal. No promises were made, no grand declarations. Just the quiet acceptance that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together, in this place that was both tomb and cradle. As dawn deepened into morning, I breathed in the smoke and the light, the silence and the murmurs of memory. The fire had taken so much from me, but it had also given me something I had forgotten to seek, peace. And with that peace came a tentative hope, fragile as the first spark of flame, yet unstoppable in its quiet persistence. I stepped forward, not as the actor I had been, but as the man I was becoming, scarred, uncertain, but finally free. The ruins whispered around me, not in accusation, but in invitation. The stage was set not for a grand return, but for something far more profound, an honest reckoning, a whispered farewell, and the first step toward whatever future awaited among the ashes. And so, beneath the pale light of morning, I took that step, carrying with me the fire's legacy, destructive, transformative, eternal. But this was not the end.